Well, good to see you, Susan Nienaber.
Good to see you, Mark Sundby.
Yeah. So, and a warm welcome to our LeaderWise audience as I have the privilege of introducing Susan to the wider audience, many of whom probably already know you, and for some, it'll be an introduction to who you are.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to be coming to LeaderWise.
I mean, it was a long time coming to actually
Yes.
have you join our staff, and now here you are, and we're thrilled too that we have you. I like to think of it as the pinnacle of your career.
Yes.
I don't know if you'd agree, but after all those long years of experience, we
Yeah.
just become better, I think, as consultants and therapists and such.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there is something about being more seasoned and having more experience under your belt when you're talking about therapy or my most of my consulting has been in really high conflict situations. And I think you can read all kinds of books and get all kinds of degrees, but there's so much of being in the trenches around those kinds of professional things that is just invaluable. And so it's great to be at this point in my career. I don't have the quite the same energy that I did in my 40s, but um, but it's nice to have that much experience under my belt. So
And I know we've talked about that, you and I, Susan, about for both of us, the energy level changes. And in some ways, the experience kind of compensates for that, I think. We may not be running around as much doing so many different things, but what we do, I mean, I don't know about you, but just feeling more grounded in our work.
oh yeah, absolutely. And you and I've talked about this too. I think there's a certain point in your vocational journey where it's also about leaving a legacy and passing on information to the next generation and being of support. I just got off the phone with someone who's coming in new to our system where I work now, and it was just one of those conversations that this is what my experience has been. These are some things that you might want to think about. This is what has worked well. You're walking into an organization, a very different place than I did, but here's what's worked, and so I look forward to more of that, so that all those years of experience don't feel like they die with me when when that day comes. So yeah.
Well, and what I'm hearing is you have a long history as a congregational consultant. You have a
Yeah.
long history as workshop leader,
Yeah.
therapist, many different hats that you've worn, and to be able
Yeah.
to pass that on to the next generation, that
Mm.
wisdom that you've garnered.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
am curious though, Susan, is there a common thread? Because you've worn so many different professional hats. Is there a
Yeah.
common thread that runs through these?
Yeah, I think there is for me, and it's not something that I realized early on in my career. But at some point, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I realized that um, the common thread for me, my call in life really has been about organizational and individual transformation. And because I've had such a diverse career in many ways, it's it's been I'm more and more grateful the older that I get for the really rich experiences that I've had and the ability to walk alongside so many individuals and so many organizations in turmoil, who are experiencing such enormous change and challenge, and to really be able to see the miracles of transformation that can come out of even some of the absolute worst possible things that you can imagine. And when I was at Alban, I didn't know this, the Alban Institute, I didn't know this going into the job. But what I quickly realized is that Alban, people came to Alban after they had exhausted many other possibilities and resources. So by the time things got to me, things were bad. They were really bad. And I was dealing with situations primarily across the lower 48 in Canada, and some of the worst things that happen for congregations. And going into such intense situations, but then also getting to be a part of the recovery process and to see what happens when people choose, even in the midst of some of the worst possible things, to learn from this and to learn everything that they can from this in order to create a better future. I mean, that brings tears to my eyes just talking about it, because it's such a profound journey, and I have so many memories and so many stories, and feel just incredibly blessed and thankful for all of those experiences. A few years ago, I was working with a job transition coach because I knew that I was in a term limited position with my denominational work. And about a session and a half into working with him, he was from the corporate world, and so there wasn't much overlap in our worlds. And he looked at me one day and he said, "How many people are there like you?" And I said, "Well, I think not very many. I mean, at that large of a national and international level, I know a few men, but I didn't know of any, women who had worked that many years at that scale with that level of intensity." And I don't think I realized, that there aren't very many folks like that, and that makes me even more grateful for the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you were unique in your skill set. You are unique in your skill set. But I was thinking of all those years at Auburn, and you've
Yeah.
continued that forward, that work
Yeah.
after Auburn
Oh, yeah.
transformed itself. Mhm.
Yeah. I was really blessed. The bishop who hired me said to me in the very first meeting, "I want you to keep your fingers in consulting because I think it's good for you and good for us."
Mhm.
I just about fell off my chair. I mean, that was a really visionary, enlightened leader who could say that to me and who understood me that quickly, and what was going to be good for me. And so, yeah, I've kept my fingers in consulting throughout the time that I've been in the denominational role. And my boss was absolutely right. It was good for me. And yeah, I think it allowed me to put some distance from the intensity of the work because we've been going through a global schism in the years that I've been there. And I think it allowed me to have sort of like a half a foot out of the organization and something else to focus on. And it was true that as I was learning there, that was helping with the learning in our organization as well. So I was really blessed to be able to work with him. He was a stunning leader, and I learned a lot.
And then a big part of your role at LeaderWise going forward will be therapy.
Yes.
And so for therapy, I'm curious if you have an area of expertise or specialization that you'd like to share.
Yeah. Really early on, many years ago, as I was starting to move into mental health, I had the opportunity to do an inpatient residency at Abbott Northwestern Hospital. And on that inpatient unit, well, I did two units. One was adolescent dual diagnosis, chemical dependency, and mental health, and then I had an adult unit. And on the adult unit, of course, there were many people who had been suicidal. There were lots, I mean, nearly everybody on the inpatient unit had come from uh, family of origin experiences where they had had either a lot of abuse or neglect or other, very painful experiences growing up as children. So um, because I'd had that experience when I got into the group practice, people who know that I had that year of inpatient on those 2 units, I just started to get a lot of referrals for people who'd experienced abuse or neglect in their background. And so I was seeing a lot of female sexual abuse survivors. I was seeing adults with single onset traumatic experiences, situations where they nearly died or something along those lines. And after a few years of working mostly with a population that I did general mental health things, worked with a lot of clergy, worked with people with depression, grief and loss, anxiety, situational factors, interpersonal relationship difficulties. So I'd done a lot of that, but a lot of my caseload was people who'd been through really terrible things and trauma. So about halfway through, after a few years, maybe 5 years or so, this new thing had come out called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I did not, I mean, I knew it was new. I didn't know how new it was when I went through the training. And looking back on it, it was early. I did the training really early. And when I went through the training, it was extensive. There was a 2-part training, and I think it was like 40 hours for each of those level 1 and level 2 trainings. And immediately fell in love with EMDR. It is such a great tool. And now that I'm coming back into doing therapy again, it's been fun in recent months to see how many advancements there have been with that tool and how much it's broadened in its application and use. And it was one of those tools that very rapidly, there was a lot of research around it because it seemed too good to be true. So a lot of people were trying to research it to debunk it so that they could get rid of it. And instead they found out, really how very effective it is. So I loved EMDR so much that I promised myself that I would be doing the EMDR someday when I came back into therapy. And so I'm really looking forward to that. I mean, it can help with big traumas. It can help with little traumas. It can help with fear of spiders. I mean, there's just so much that there's just so many applications for it. And so I can't wait. I loved it. I just absolutely love doing the EMDR. I loved being a therapist. I've loved everything that I've done, but
Uh,
I did really love being a therapist. So
yeah. So I think when I first heard of you, and I'm wondering if it was when we first met, you were a therapist, right? And I knew your love of it, and I knew your reputation as a therapist. And doesn't mean you weren't great at all those other things and that you're still not
yeah,
great at them.
yeah.
But I also knew this as one of your first loves.
Yeah, I think so. And people even today, like my former boss, he actually just said this to me recently. I still carry an orientation to the world as a therapist. I still think that's has never left me. And I think that was my first love. I was a parish pastor and I enjoyed that, but I knew going into that I was going to specialize and go into psychotherapy. And I have found that being trained as a therapist was enormously helpful for the type of consulting that I did in high conflict situations. It was invaluable to have that background first before going into that. So,
I can definitely see that. And
yeah,
yeah, and I'm just curious if there's any other areas of interest.
yeah. I mean, as I mentioned before, I do think I've worked with lots of people around depression, anxiety, interpersonal relationship difficulties, grief and loss, because I've seen so many clergy over the years, just understanding the nature of ministry and what clergy experience in those unique settings. Yeah, no, so it's been just such a extremely positive 30 plus years for me of interacting with North Central Ministry Development Center and LeaderWise. So it's kind of a dream come true. It's like I feel like I'm waking up, from a dream after all these years. And so it's quite exciting to be here.
Curious in your personal life, and won't get too personal, but
Yeah.
curious if you collect anything. Like, yeah,
Well, my husband would say I collect plants,
uh-huh.
too many of them. And
Okay.
I do love to garden. And when we built the particular house that we live in, we landscaped in such a way that I could garden my little heart out, yeah, with how we did the landscaping. My plan, I haven't had enough time to slow down yet to do this, but my plan is to become a master gardener. And that's really what I see my vocation being in retirement. A friend of mine sent me this meme recently because she likes to garden too. And it said, if you're not careful, you're going to end up an old lady living in a potting shed with thousands of flowers and 5 rescue dogs. I thought this is someone who knows me well.
That's an image. Yeah.
I have a new hobby in recent years, and I don't collect anything except experiences with this. But a few years ago, I took my executive leadership team axe throwing.
Oh,
None of us had been axe throwing.
uh-huh.
And so people were quite leery about this experience. Fortunately, I think they had enough trust in me to go on this adventure, but I'd never done it either. And usually when I go into those situations where I've never done something before, I'm not a competitive person. I don't care how well I do. I'm just there for the fun with the group. And when I'm that relaxed, I tend to do very well. So in this first experience, I just immediately picked up on it and was doing really well. And the coach who from the axe throwing place that was working with us, because we needed a chaperone because none of us had ever done this before. He came up to me and pulled me aside and said, "Are you on a league?" And I said, there are leagues." And he said, "You should be on a league."
I would just remind people that if they want to learn more about you or any of our LeaderWise team, that it's really easy to access us. It's www.leaderwise.org. And we're so grateful you're on the team.
I am grateful too. Thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah.